good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm in the Middle East, so it's good afternoon for me. Absolutely delighted to have you all with us today to discuss the very important topic of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and the Women's Empowerment Principles. I am Alice Law. I'm the CEO of Committed to Good, or CTG as we are better known. Before we actually get started, I have a few housekeeping matters. Hopefully you are seeing the WEPs poll pop up on your screen as you're logging in. Please do answer that. It would give us a good idea of who is aware of the WEPs and who isn't. We are streaming this event live on our social media channels, and we will also be recording the event as well, which we will share after the webinar. We would warmly welcome participants sharing any questions they have for the panelists, and we will be running question and answers towards the end. There is a Q&A function. Please, can you put it in there rather than in the chat? You can see it below on the control panel. I wish to make it as interactive as feasible as a webinar can be. So if you can please state which country you're from, and who, if not to all the panelists, who you wish to address your question to. We are so delighted you've been able to join us today. Please also share your location in the chat box. I see a number of people are already introducing themselves there. I know we would all love to know who has joined to listen in today. I've spent the last 18 years working in many different conflict-affected countries. And actually, due to that, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is something I am very passionate about. Since I first went to Iraq in 2003, I have been committed to making a difference and creating a lasting impact in the countries we work. And this is very much the vision of CTG. CTG was founded in Afghanistan in 2006. We now work in 21 different fragile and conflict-affected countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Committed to Good staff implement a wide range of different humanitarian and development programs, from food distribution in South Sudan to assisting migrants in Libya, to human rights monitoring in Yemen, advising governments on their constitutions in countries like Iraq and Somalia, to building schools and hospitals in Afghanistan. It's through a lot of the work that CTG does that has given me insight into the importance of empowering women in conflict settings. And this is why I signed the WEPs. Before we delve into what the Women's Empowerment Principles are, or WEPs as I have referred to them, I wish to introduce you to our speakers and objectives of this Together for Equality webinar today. So the objectives is really to increase awareness around the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and how it links to international frameworks such as the UN's Women Empowerment Principles, or the WEPs, and the Sustainable Development Goals. I think amongst our discussions today, we're going to be highlighting the many challenges that are faced by women in fragile and conflict-affected countries, and the barriers that are impeding their empowerment and equal access to opportunity. And hopefully we will be presenting some solutions that can be adopted by organizations to promote women's empowerment in conflict settings. We're extremely excited to have a panel of three very inspiring speakers with us today, each of whom have their own unique stories and experiences of empowering women in conflict settings. I would like to introduce Peterson Magula. Peterson is a gender equality champion and a specialist in women's rights and development. He has over 18 years experience on global policy issues and programs related to gender equality, women's empowerment and development. He has extensive experience across countries like Moldova, Belarus, Afghanistan, Liberia, and others, providing strategic leadership and management to programs with a focus on women, peace and security, ending violence against women, women's participation and representation, and women's economic empowerment. Today, he works for the UN, and he's UN Women's Country Representative for South Sudan. We have Manija Wafek, who is the president and co-founder of Afghanistan's Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the AWCCI. She has 19 years of experience in development, 15 of which have been focused on women's empowerment and gender equality, working with international government and non-governmental organizations. Her persistent and influential lobbying skills have resulted in several policy recommendations being incorporated and improved in Afghanistan. Amongst them was the 5% preference clause in the national procurement procedure of the government, and 15 to 25% of industrial parks to be allocated to small, medium, and women-owned businesses in the National Industrial Parks policy. And we have Umrah Omar, who was born in Kenya and educated around the world. Umrah is an award-winning, globally recognized public figure known for pushing the limits to navigate identity politics and make a difference by disrupting oppressive status quo paradigms. She lives in Lamu, Kenya, where she's the founder of a free medical program, a school for the disenfranchised, and sports programs to uplift young boys and girls. Umrah is also running for governor of Lamu in the 2020 elections, which will actually make her the first and youngest woman from Kenya's coast to ever make such an attempt, despite the toxic patriarchy and security risks involved. So thank you very much to all my panelists for taking the time to join us today. And following their interventions, I will actually open the floor up to questions and answers. So please do remember to use the Q&A function and rather than the chat, so I can identify these easily. So Peterson, I was hoping that you could start us off, please, by telling us a little bit about the women's empowerment principles and your own journey of implementing the WEPs in different fragile and conflict-affected countries through your work with the United Nations and UN Women.
Thank you so much, Alice, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to our panelists. I mean to our participants, and I hope you can hear me. As Alice said, I'm based in South Sudan, and I would like to take you quickly through the WEPs as requested. As most of you might be aware that 25 years back, all governments met in Beijing to really come up with an action plan for women globally, to push for the rights of women globally. And there are a number of actors who were identified as key players to push for these women's rights. And one of the actors was the private sector. Now, after Beijing, when it came to implementation of these actions from Beijing, many actors did a lot of work. The government started coming out with policies and legal frameworks. The civil society started advocating and making the governments accountable. And so many influencers pushed for these women's rights. However, as time went on, 10, 15 years after Beijing, we saw that the private sector had not really been so engaged into women, peace and security and women's agenda globally. So in 2010, UN Women with the UN Global Compact came together and they came together to come up with strategies through which the private sector can be engaged on women issues, on women's rights, on gender equality. And under that, they undertook a lot of consultations with different stakeholders, including women networks, the private sector actors, the government and different actors in that area. And out of that, 7 principles were agreed upon, which can drive the women's rights within the private sector. And these are the 7 areas which I want to quickly take you through. You can see them on the screen. The first was
We have lost Peterson momentarily, I think. The connection can be a little bit bad from South Sudan sometimes. So hopefully he will come back online in a minute. I wonder if we want to switch our cameras off when he does so that the participants can actually hear Peterson speak. Let's just, apologies for this. We will pause for a moment. I'm sure a lot of people who are joining today, I can see from all sorts of countries, Nigeria, Yemen, Somalia. I'm sure you all face this internet blips from time to time. We have lost Peterson. I think he is coming back online again now.
Employees are accessing health and safety.
Peterson,
and meaning that there should be.
Peterson, I'm afraid we lost you for a moment there. I'm going to suggest that the other panelists and myself turn our cameras off while you're speaking, just so that it doesn't interrupt your bandwidth. But we lost you. You just started talking about the 7 principles.
Okay. So it's connection, I guess. So the 7 principles, I repeat again, the first one is on gender equal corporate leadership, which is also on the slide, as you can see. And this was the first one to ensure that the CEO of these companies take full leadership to ensure that gender equality and women's rights are promoted within their companies. And that has to be from the leadership level to commit to this. So that was the first principle which was agreed upon. The second one was to ensure that the workplace provides an enabling environment where women's rights can be asserted and there will be equal opportunities for both men and women within these companies. The third principle was to ensure that all the workers in these companies have access to healthy and safety measures without discrimination. That whatever opportunities, whatever privileges are given to workers to access health and safety measures should cut across all workers, not without discrimination, whether it's a man or a woman. And the fourth one is also to ensure that there is opportunities for education and capacity building and trainings for women within these companies. The fifth principle was to ensure that in terms of the way the companies operate in reaching out to the communities and in their distribution chain, chain supplies and so on, they ensure that they are reaching out, ensuring that women's rights and gender principles and gender equitable approaches are undertaken within their companies. The second last is about the ensuring that there is outreach to the community. And of course, on this, we were looking at the CEOs. How can they also be engaged into ensuring that communities are aware that these companies, value and respect the rights of women, and they're also promoting gender equality? And how can they be the face of this agenda in the public domain? And of course, the last one is to come back and then we measure progress on how has there been development and progress on the above 6 principles. So those were the 7 principles which UN Women and the UN Global Compact came up with. And after that, these were to be sent to companies. We reached out, we mobilized the companies in different countries to see how can they start off with these with these principles. If you can go to the second slide quickly. Now, after engaging all these companies for a number of years, 10 years now, we did an assessment from countries where we've been implementing these principles and supporting companies. And we get reports on how companies have taken up the issue of gender equality and women's empowerment within their operations. And companies shared some of the good stories. They were telling us, look, after engaging more women and promoting women in our companies, we can now see more productivity on our businesses. We are selling, we are attracting younger talents, young women who feel they are safe to work in their companies. Why? Because the companies have put these principles there and they stand by them. So there's productivity, they are reporting productivity on how they do business. Also, these companies are telling us now we are more credible. We feel we are trusted. We feel, other partners reaching out to us to engage us in their interventions. So it's because they are seeing them as very balanced companies, which look at the rights of women and rights of men equally without any discrimination. And thirdly, they are telling us also that we have now more innovations coming. They are saying we've attracted younger talent. These younger talents are coming up with new ideas of how to do business differently. And the example, of course, is one of these current situation we are in of COVID, how now companies are tapping into the new, the younger talent to use technology so that they can reach out to their markets. This is one of the outcomes which they are telling us that they're tapping from these young people and young women who have come. And others are telling us that, look, we now have a big and wider markets. We are now being reached out, people are buying our products. They are looking at us as companies which are also ensuring that women's rights, women's needs are taken into consideration. So these are some of just a few examples on how companies who are engaging into WEPs are telling us after the 10 years of implementing these WEPs. One important aspect which has come up is that when the assessment looked at these companies and they were asking, how are you working together with other companies which are not implementing the WEPs? And they are telling us that, look, they seem to be overperforming their peers, and they're putting it at over 20%. They feel because of the gender equity principles which they are having within their workplaces. So these are some of the few examples we have on WEPs, on how they are applied into private sector. And now private sector really are coming up more strongly. Companies are signing up. We are seeing even the G7, we see how it's pushing for these WEPs. So it's one of the principles which we are really pushing to ensure that companies promote gender equality. Now, on the third slide, you will see that I've put a few notes there to tell you that we've, after 2020 last year, when we did an assessment, initially our focus was on mainly companies, focusing on the internal systems of companies. But we realized that, look, we need to engage more even external actors who will help these companies to push for these WEPs, which will help them to have enabling environment. And as you see on the slide where we have stakeholders WEPs as 2.0, which is one of the actions we take right from the end of 2020, we are also now beginning to engage investors in countries. Investors come with money, they have the power of money, but we are saying that these investors, when they sit on the boards, one of the criteria they should put forward for monitoring or monitoring their performance and the investments, it should be gender equality within these companies so that they can help us to push for it at the different levels when they engage with different board members of companies. That's one. We are also seeing that there are networks within the countries which are very powerful. And we have networks like chambers of commerce and industry. We have networks like, the stock exchange networks. We have a number of workers, a number of networks which can influence at the highest level. And we are saying they should, if they are registering these companies, one of the criteria they can have is let them ensure that they have the WEPs as part of their their performance, their strategy for all these companies to be approved. And so we are beginning now engaging these chambers of commerce. And I think my colleague will talk about the Afghanistan, how we talked about this when we were pushing for the registration of these women-led organizations. And we said this should be one of the areas, criteria which they can use. The other one are the academias. Academias are so strong, they can include WEPs in in their curriculums at the university, so that when young students, young people come out of this university, they're already empowered, even when they come up with their business ideas. They know that WEPs principles are key to make them successful, as we've seen above there. And then lastly, we have other, like the governments. The governments should have frameworks, legal and policy frameworks that should provide an enabling environment for the private sector to grow and to operate. And one of the criteria or one of the legal frameworks which they should have is to ensure that there is law or policies which embed WEPs as one of the enabling environment for the companies to perform. So these are quickly some of the stakeholders which we are identifying and beginning engaging with at the national level to see how that can be pushed. And maybe just to give an example where we've been, where we work in some of these areas, in East and Southern Africa, we have a very strong program on WEPs. In Malawi, we have another program of WEPs. In South Sudan here, which we are starting now, East Europe, we have a very strong program in Moldova, and I would talk about that if time allows. But these are some of the programs we have, and globally, it's working. We are seeing companies reporting. And if you go to the last slide, you can highlight the contacts on how a company can register and become one of the WEPs, one of the WEPs participants. And the addresses are there, the email, the link is there. Companies can go and register on this and become, and again, it's business. Being part of the WEPs is a successful business strategy, because we see how it's working now. So briefly, this is how I wanted to start this, and I hope I was a bit clear on WEPs. So over to Maria.
Thank you very much, Peterson. So I'm trying to turn my video on. I keep turning it on and then off again. I wanted to just comment on what you said about the raising credibility. We signed the WEPs in 2017, and after becoming WEP signatories, it really does change how organizations look at you. Women want to work for your organization. You're seen very differently. I'd like to hear some of your solutions that you've want to talk about in Moldova around what works in implementation of the WEPs. But first of all, I want to ask you, I might come on to that later on, but I want to talk about the enabling environment with a focus on legal and policy frameworks. What are the barriers that actually exist for WEPs in a country like South Sudan, particularly for private sector organizations and local and international investors?
Thank you so much, Alice, for this question. There are barriers, and looking at countries like South Sudan, which have been in conflict, so they're having active conflict, the first key barrier we see is the security. Why? Because if
we have lost Peterson, I'm afraid, again. Problems. We seem to be having internet problems all over the world. I hope everyone can hear me now. I believe I am back online. So Manisha, are you with us still?
Yes.
Excellent. It's wonderful that you're joining us today. I believe you're still in Afghanistan. Before you tell us a little bit about the AWCCI, please can you offer some insights into the extremely fragile situation in Afghanistan at the moment?
Yes, thank you, Alice. And it's great to be with all of you today. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all the participants of today's webinar. Thanks to Peterson for his great overview of the WEPs, and it's great. Currently, Afghanistan, what you all see on media, I'm sure it's worse than what it is. The bigger cities are much secure, and life is going on, business is going on, all of us are working, living. And so I just want to tell everyone not to worry about us, but of course in a number of our districts and rural areas, things have been unfortunately really bad. Unfortunately, war has destructed homes, their bazaars, their marketplaces, the district offices, and so on. And people have been displaced from those districts that were captured by Taliban. they're displaced into the closer cities and closer district areas. So once again, unfortunately, after 20 years of all our international partners contributing and being part of Afghanistan's peace building and security, we went to a situation that none of us expected and none of us wanted to go in. Yeah, so this is the situation right now. And I hope that it gets better soon.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about the work you do, Manisha? It's really quite incredible.
Yes. So I would start telling you, yes, about AWCCI, Afghanistan Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which I always say it's not an entity, it's a movement. We started a long time ago with a lot of efforts, a lot of support from our both businesswomen in Afghanistan, our international partners, national partners, and today where we are, this is what we achieved through that movement. That movement needed a lot of course, commitment, sacrifices, and so on, because it was not easy in a country like Afghanistan to create such an entity, such a platform that's specifically addressing women's issues, and that's specifically representing women at such different sphere of life that's new for Afghan women. We have had women, of course, working for government in the past. We have had women working in the education sector and in cultural sectors and so on. But this is almost first time in our history that women are coming in the foreground, working in the business and economic sector. They were all the time in the background, producing, for example, carpet. They were part of producing dry fruits. And those two items, carpets and dry fruits, have been always the major export commodities of Afghanistan. So I don't want to overlook women's participation in that. And I always say that Afghan women have been economic actors and not economic beneficiaries, because they have produced those items for all these years. But now they've come foreground, they have registered businesses. And so if we move to another slide where I want to give you an overview of how many women-owned businesses today we have in Afghanistan is really remarkable. We have 2,471 formal businesses that are registered and have one type of license at least. And we have over 54,000 informal businesses all over Afghanistan. You can see the distribution here based on the provinces. And you can see all 34 provinces at least have some number of women-owned businesses that are functioning in those provinces. And if we go to the next slide, on the sectors, this is another very interesting information for all of you. I'm sure that businesses in Afghanistan, women businesses, used to start with very traditional ones, which were clothing, food processing, and so on, agri-based businesses. But fortunately now you can see that from the 2,471 formal businesses, now we have they are in all range of businesses, services, education, and healthcare, construction, jewelry, and the hospitality like restaurants, logistics, IT, media services, travel agencies, recycling, which is, of course, as we talk about SDGs and so on. So they are now in all types of businesses. They have entered in all sectors. And that's a very good and hopeful phase for us, because all our new generation girls, they will have now the courage to enter into these sectors. If we look at the other slide, which talks about their education level, again, if we look at the education level of our formal businesses, we have almost all of them formally educated, a great number of them above primary and middle school, high school graduates, they own bachelor degrees, they own master's degree. So that's another very good news, that women-owned businesses that are functioning formally and they have some type of license in Afghanistan, they have a better prospect in terms of really succeeding in those business ventures. But unfortunately, in our informal businesses, we still have a great number of them, 48.5% of them without any formal education. But sometimes without education, we have seen stories that women have done well. And so this number of women as well, I'm sure, will do well if we provide them with some opportunities. If we look at the other slide, which is on the social media use, you can see our licensed businesses. A majority of them, 64.6% of them, today they have access to smartphones and they use social media for promoting their businesses. And so that's another good news for all of us, that though it's Afghanistan and infrastructure-wise with technology, we are not doing very well, but still we have had a good number of women having access and having the possibility of making use of today's technology. And if I go to the next slide to just tell you a little bit of what we do. Yes, you mentioned some successful policy advocacy that we have done until today. 5% preferential clause in the national procurement procedure. We have received a number of contracts for our women-owned businesses, 15 to 25% of land allocation in the industrial parks. But also recently we put together a huge document called Women's National Business Agenda. And through this Women's National Business Agenda, we have made some new recommendations to the government. For example, in terms of procurement, we have asked the government to allocate, to this time, give us set-aside contracts of 10% all over Afghanistan, not only at Kabul level, but at subnational level as well. So women-owned businesses at subnational level as well, become government's contractors. And if we move to the last slide, which talks about, about some of, which was some of our major programs, that I would like to mention just one of them. And that was our recent initiative that we would like to promote products in the international markets and under a banner of Made by Afghan Women, a trademark Made by Afghan Women that has a certification process, and our certification process has all the women's empowerment principles, has all the international ILO standards and our national labor laws standards for women's empowerment through these companies that we will certify and give them the permission to use the Made by Afghan Women trademark. Thank you, Alice.
Thank you very much, Manisha. I really appreciate that. I'm going to come and ask you a question shortly. I'd like to move to Umrah now. You launched Safari Doctors and have won many awards, as well as being publicly recognized for the amazing work that you are doing for rural communities. Please, can you shed a little light on the work you actually do and on some of the challenges you've come across regarding transition when it comes to women in conflict affected areas? Manisha, would you like to keep your camera on? I think we're okay now. And if Peterson has joined again, I've actually got mine switched off, so I can't see if he has or not. Then I'll hand over to you, Umrah.
Hi, everyone. First is just a big shout out for everyone that's online for giving us your precious time. So this is very exciting to be able to be on this platform. So again, my name is Umrah Omar, and I am with you here from Lamu County, which is on the northern coast of Kenya. Not so much of a predominantly conflict area, but we are in a unique geographic location by the Somali border. And I moved permanently to Lamu in 2014/2015, right after the major attacks that happened by Al-Shabaab. And my moving here was specifically when a medical aid project had pulled out 2 years ago. And we stepped in using the same blueprint of traveling across Lamu County, delivering free primary healthcare and primarily getting to women and children. When we talk of a mother who has, like 4 or 5 children, and in order to access just a vaccine or to go for prenatal checkup is a journey, that becomes problematic. So it's key to focus on how health is affected or implicated during conflict times and in conflict areas. So we travel every month, and we've been doing that for the last 7 months, scaling up slowly to different villages on this idea of first mile healthcare. Like healthcare services cannot be compromised in such conflict areas, where we've come across referral cases, a woman with a bullet that's been lodged in her neck for 2 years, but hasn't had the access or mobility to get to healthcare, where we have, young kids missing out on the vaccines, missing out on school. And the biggest factor around this, to be honest, is the presence of these women and the realities of such communities at the decision-making tables. So we're going through an interesting time, both locally and I think globally, as far as gender representation is concerned in spaces of making decisions. Myself right now as a female candidate in a Muslim context, running for the highest office in the county, when we look at the discussions that are happening around having female qadis, which is like a female, representatives in Islamic law. When we look at Tanzania with the first female president in Eastern Africa, so there's putting this mainstreaming so that it's not about Women's Day or it's not about, that one-off occasion. And I think we have a lot to learn from the resilience of women in conflict areas and the realities. And with what happened with COVID-19 as well, looking at the importance of WASH, where it's our women going out to carry the water, where it was looking at the issue of domestic abuse, given that we've had roles and responsibility changing, but not the rules of the game changing as far as culture and religion is concerned. So I really want us to challenge ourselves in how the system is designed versus the reality of the women in conflict area and women in general, where we have inheritance laws that have sidelined women, where we're having reproductive health decisions that are being made by men over women's bodies. So we've just been able to play that little part in putting access to quality healthcare. And I'll go to the second slide, where we've decided we will really expand on the realities of Lamu County, where right now we're straddling between being, a war on terror hotbed between Kenya and Somalia versus issues of maternal and mortality rates as the worst contributors in the country, like 60%. We're one of the 15 counties that contribute to that. So juggling between these two realities is where our role as Safari doctors in engaging the private sector, if we go to the next slide, is what had led us now to coming up with a joint venture that addresses healthcare, especially for remote areas, what we're calling first mile health, especially women and children who don't only go to get health services because they're sick, but because they have to, where we can deliver our medical outreach, where we can have research and training in partnership with the academia and the biotech companies, and deliver quality healthcare at the level 4 hospital standards. So this is the venture that has come together after 7 years of working in these sensitive areas and coming up with a way of how to ensure that first mile healthcare is collective for especially the women whose bodies and whose realities are the victim of the systems that we have in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Umrah. You bring up many important points, and I wanted to touch on one that fascinates me, which is the subject of inheritance, and that women are not afforded the same rights as men. I met in Somalia an amazing lady called Ilwad Elman, who her father was a major activist. He was assassinated, and her mother and her sisters had to leave Somalia as refugees because their uncle or another male family member actually inherited everything from him. They were very lucky. They got asylum in Canada and were looked after by people who supported what they were doing. And they've all gone back into Somalia, and they're doing amazing work. They've got the Elman Peace and Human Rights Foundation, and which rehabilitates child soldiers. It looks after victims of gender-based violence. And we actually ran an entrepreneurship training with them for survivors of GBV under our CTG giving initiative. So, you know, it is an issue that women are not afforded the same rights in a lot of these countries. I just wanted to ask you one more question. You know, you're in the health sector. What do you think of the impact of COVID has been on women's economic empowerment, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected countries?
The biggest challenge we've had is between the role of the women, like I said, where roles and responsibilities have drastically shifted, women having to share a bigger burden of family care, with men having really been sidelined in being able to go and make that daily bread. So we've seen in nationally, whether it's rural or even in the urban areas, a higher increase in gender-based violence, where you have these challenges in households being magnified. We've had women bearing the bigger burden of also footing bills for healthcare for the elderly and for their community. And so tapping in a lot to the merry-go-round development kitties for healthcare issues instead. So it's been a significant ripple effect, especially because we lack adequate social welfare structures that were supposed to have stepped in order to alleviate the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Umrah. I see we have Peterson back now, so I want to just invite him to switch his camera on and hopefully rejoin the conversation. Peterson, are you there? Oh, we have you. Excellent. We lost you. You were actually talking about the barriers that are faced, and I wanted to ask you a question around the barriers that are actually faced by women in conflict settings and that are preventing their empowerment and equal participation. And we have one question and answer, which I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I think that's slightly directed at you. So perhaps you can continue what you were saying, and then I can ask you Linda Whetstone's question.
Thank you, and the connection a bit went off. But I'm back. So I was highlighting the barriers. The first one is we can't do anything unless we have a secure environment, unless we have security in the country. So that's the first barrier we have, that companies and entrepreneurs are not being able to start investments in an environment where they're not sure whether their businesses will be safe or not. That's the first barrier generally. So that's something which needs to take an action on as we move forward. But besides that, in terms of legal and policy, the whole aspect of providing incentives to the entrepreneurs. And on this, I'm looking at basically the women. How can we provide the incentives which enables women to register their businesses? And we see most of these women, they wanted to register businesses at the different levels, but incentives for them to do that, the laws, the policies, the cost aspect of it limits them to do that. So that cuts across whether men or women, but for us, we are saying we need this to be addressed to empower women, to ensure that women have access to easy registration of their businesses. Secondly, in some countries, we have some tax holidays, the tax-free period, where women can begin the businesses and they're given a period of not paying a tax until the businesses catch up. And if we don't provide that, it becomes a barrier. Maybe the last one quickly is the whole legal aspects on how can they facilitate access to finance to women businesses and entrepreneurs? So that can also be something which governments and countries like South Sudan is looking into. What are the opportunities? What are the legal opportunities for women and new entrepreneurs to access finance when they begin businesses? If you don't have that, then it becomes a challenge for these businesses to start. So that's these are some of the few barriers I wanted to really put forward on that question.
Thank you very much, Peterson. I'm actually going to ask Manisha in a few minutes to come in on the incentives to register businesses, because I think it's a really interesting point you made. But I'd like to just go to Linda Wetzone's question. She has a question about the role and responsibilities of the state in enabling opportunities for women just as much as the private sector. And indeed, it may be more foundational. For that instance, she believes that in South Sudan, women are allowed to own property under the law, but that is not enforced by the state. And most importantly, women don't even know of their legal rights here. How do you think that we can address that?
I think I missed some of the parts of the question. If you can repeat it so that I get it clearly.
You actually have it on your screen as well. If you should have a question and answers button.
I think I lost the questions when I was disconnected. I lost in the chat. I lost most of the questions. Okay. See, I can see it.
In summary, she was saying that South Sudanese women are not allowed to own their own property, and that the law is not really enforced by the state, and women don't tend to know about their legal rights there. How can that be changed?
Thank you. That's a very, very good question. Actually, last week, part of the property we are talking about is, of course, is land. And last week, we just had a conference on how can we ensure that the reinforced land rights for women. So that also links to the whole property aspect, that we are really engaging with the government at the different levels to see how can we develop legal frameworks that can promote the rights of women to own property. Some of these legal frameworks are there, but in terms of implementation, in terms of sensitizing the communities on the rights of women, not only women, but also the local leadership, because this comes all from the local leadership in terms of the perception and lack of understanding on the laws. So we are really working on that. It's a big issue in this country. We are trying to push for that to ensure that the whole legal aspects of women's ownership to property, to land, is really reinforced. So this is one of the things we are doing as UN Women. We are working together with other partners to ensure that that is really being taken into action. So this is one of the key actions we are doing at the country.
Umrah, are you wanting to comment on this as well?
When we're talking about the state and when we're coming with government, I think the challenge that we've been having as well, it's not just unique to South Sudan, it's the issue of the follow-up and implementation and I don't want to say rot, but I will say the word rot that has come in pushing through, whether it's legislation or implementation as far as our governments are concerned. And we have failed women terribly because we do have a lot of stuff that's on paper and not necessarily put out into reality. And that's where even the private sector now, we can talk of the collaboration, whether it's legal aid, whether it's financing some of these calls to action. So there's a lot of room improved as far as seeing what's on paper translate into reality.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I would like to encourage the participants here. Please do send your questions and answers in. I know our panelists are keen to answer your thoughts and questions as well as mine. But I would like to just turn to Manisha and ask her, you have a lot of companies in the presentation that you gave us that are unregistered businesses. What are the incentives that you see for women to actually register their businesses? And what are the challenges that are faced in doing so?
Okay, so we have just started talking to the government about these informal businesses because it's a huge opportunity, both for the government, for national institutions like ourselves, and for these women. So we all work together and make sure that these businesses flourish and succeed and create more jobs. And the only way would be to register them, formalize them, and through the formalization and connecting them to the networks and to various opportunities, we can do that. And so incentives for them to register would be easier licensing processes, would be one type of license, one type of specific license, because we have many types of licenses, and those would be too complicated for these women to understand and to go from one office to the other office, all the bureaucracies that we have here in terms of getting different types of licenses. And so really type of license, and then having everything at one place. As all of us know, we call it one-stop shop, where you get everything done at one place. And then the incentives on the taxation. Businesses, as soon as they are registered and formalized, they are taxed for everything. And so if the government does not provide an incentive in terms of tax for a year, or at least 2 years, so they really get to a level of really good revenue generation and understanding of how to run their businesses based on government's laws and regulations. They need sometimes to understand all of those and learn. So tax would be the second thing. And the third thing would be some other incentives as well, like giving them land, so they come forward, formalize their businesses with that incentive that they can get a land and they can build their small factory or small service type of business, whatever they have, and they can function from a real estate, from a very proper infrastructure place. And so together with all of this, there are so many other incentives, and as well as simplifications required in the rules and regulations that the government has here in Afghanistan. Even if the tax is waived for a year or two, again, our taxation process is very complicated. So we really need simplification. There is corruption. We really need the government to work on the elimination of corruption, and as well as, and that can be done by simplifying processes, simplifying the laws, clarifying the laws and regulations in the country. So by taking some of these measures and being more supportive and encouraging to investment, I think we can help these women-owned businesses, more than 54,000 of them, to become formalized and become part of the formal economy, imagine, and get them counted and everything, and get them connected with further opportunities.
Thank you, Manisha. I actually wanted to turn the conversation now towards the private sector and the WEPs. And, I wanted to ask in relation to the challenges, what kind of tangible initiatives can be implemented by businesses, by private sector organizations, local and international, to help promote gender equality and empower women in countries like Afghanistan? And I'll probably ask Peterson and Umrah to contribute to that question afterwards.
Yes, I think our larger businesses can become examples, can create examples. And we have. So for example, in the telecom industry, we have had one of the companies, called Roshan, their COO was a woman. And they had taken some initiatives to increase the number of female employees. And in the banking sector, for example, we have Afghanistan International Bank, AIB, who's taking some initiative in terms of building the capacity of their female employees and encouraging them to come forward to the leadership and managerial roles. And in the banking sector, for example, some of the banks, such as Ghazalfar Bank, they have started providing loan with lower interest rates and easier terms for women-owned businesses. So these can be some of the examples by larger companies to take initiatives bringing women in their leaderships, and also if there are service providers to make their services more easier available to women with some special packages for women-owned businesses or women customers in general. Peterson or Umrah may want to also contribute.
Peterson, you spent quite a lot of time in Afghanistan. Why don't you comment second? Not specifically on Afghanistan, but you can follow.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Quickly, yeah, I mean, we worked together with in Afghanistan, so yes, we had a lot of work on that. But from the broader perspective as big companies, one thing I want to add is, companies have their social corporate social responsibility, where they have to invest in social development. So I strongly believe that investing into gender-related women's rights initiative that really promote women at all levels, I think this is a very good example which big companies can demonstrate that we are taking leadership on gender equality, not only within the company, but also reaching out to the external communities. So that is one of the things which we think can really make examples. And then the second part of it for me, again, it's I link it to the to the government and so to policies. It's important that when a policy is being developed on on business development and entrepreneurship and investments, it's key that the private sector play a big role in informing these policies, putting it under the WEPs, kind of anchoring it on the WEPs, because then that gives also the government a platform through which they can make some of these private sector accountable on the rights of women once we have a policy framework which is pushing that. So for me, those two areas are key, but I think it's one, let them go back to the social responsibility and invest into women's rights, women's businesses. Two, participate in the development and implementation of policies that promote economic growth. And of course, thirdly, which I quickly point this out, it is smart. We've told the companies, it is smart to invest in women because it's business. Put money into women, the returns are higher. You have half of the population which is not being addressed. Put it in the business, invest into them, educate them, capacitate them. You are going to have more returns. The multiplier effect which we talk about in economics. So that's something which we already pushing companies to take. And then for the government, quickly, it is revenue generation. And my colleague mentioned it. You provide an enabling environment for these companies to register and perform in the short run or in the long run. It's going to contribute to the revenue generation of the country. We are looking for revenue. So do that. So quickly, that's what I wanted to emphasize on that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Peterson. Yes. You're very passionate about this. We are out of time, so I would like to ask Umrah in a few words to comment on this, and then we will sadly have to finish our conversation.
I'm sorry, Alice. Before Umrah, I just want to emphasize on what Peterson said. It's smart. It's smart. I talked to a few of these larger companies, as I said, in the banking sector and in the telecom sector here in Afghanistan. And their response was, I was like, why and how do you want to increase women in the leadership and as well as employees in your companies? They said, because of the integrity of their company, because women are less corrupt, they definitely want to have more women in their companies. And so they're putting efforts, bringing an HR manager as a women. So the female HR manager put efforts to bring more women employees in the company.
Thank you, Manager. Umrah.
Sorry, to add on to, how can private sectors contribute, right, Alice?
Yes, please.
My one key thing is that we talk about CSR, we talk about branding, there's all these like one-off feel-good activities. So if somebody who's working in this other side of the coin is about sustainability when we're investing in women.